Just a short breakdown. Or I spent a couple years early in my life in law enforcement. I worked for a sheriff's office, some in detentions and some on the road. And then I found firefighting. I spent nearly 10 years doing wildland firefighting, most of that with hotshot crews. I did some helicopter rappelling.
Right.
And then I went to a city department. Like everybody knows, we call it the structure world. I was a firefighter on a fire truck for a couple of years. During that time, I also was an EMT. I was a wilderness EMT for years, backcountry medicine, and then on a fire truck. And also in all of that, I did other specialized duties. I was high angle search and rescue early in my life. So rock climbing, ropes, and then I did some extrication specialty when I was with the city department. So a lot of exposure to a lot of risk.
Yes.
You mentioned stress.
Right.
The jiu-jitsu saying of being comfortable in uncomfortable positions, it speaks truly to stress. That's what makes us all uncomfortable.
Right.
And in emergency services, you have to show up to help when people are at their most stressed.
Right.
And we all know how being panicked or unsettled, it can be contagious.
Yes. Right.
So when we show up, we have to be the calm in the storm.
Right.
And so it really mirrors jiu-jitsu in so many ways. One is,
well,
go ahead.
before we get into the principles of it, because we want to explore that with some depth. But I mean, what you just described, repelling, structural fires that you're pulling people out of, rescuing people out in the wilderness, I mean, repelling, right? I mean, you just describe things that basically 99.99% of human beings on the planet, their knowledge and exposure to that comes to us from Hollywood. So these are theoretical things that you're saying to most of us. I've had my share of situations that I would consider stressful. However, I've never been in a situation where I was responsible for extricating somebody out of what would, absolutely be a lethal situation. So can you tell a story about one of these things that you were involved in which the stress levels were extraordinary and it required equally extraordinary control of how you felt? Could you take one of your probably million examples of things you've been in, and because you really laid out, like, in terms of everything non-military, this was you've covered you've covered lots and lots of ground where
there's a
a
lot there.
civilian,
And it's kind of funny because you when you're in that, your bar for what is stressful
right,
completely changes. And so you kind of forget. So some of the war stories, I don't even consider them war
right,
stories.
just
One situation, so the key really is always being calm, being able to act, and being able to be safe.
right,
So there was a time that I took a hand crew, it's 20 people, a firefighting crew, to Alaska. And there was a large fire that was threatening some cabins. And there were some guys that were scouting the area, and the fire made a push. The wind changed and was pushing this fire towards these two cabins.
Mm-hmm.
And they called on the radio, said, "Hey, we need some people to come in here." But it wasn't a safe situation. And so I said, being the leader of the crew, I would take myself and my assistant. We would go scout the situation, see if it'd be safe. So
Right.
we jumped on an airboat and went down a river trying to get to this cabin. And we got to a place where it was so smoky, you couldn't see the bank of the river. And the guy driving the boat, it was a civilian guy. It was his own boat. And he said, "I'm not going any further. Like, I don't feel safe here." And I knew through experience that it was still safe. The fire wasn't there. We had plenty of time. So there were two guys at this cabin.
Hey,
And
Omi,
they
can I ask
literally
you?
started.
Can I ask you a
Yeah,
detail about that? Just because
yeah,
this matters to me in other ways. Were you wearing something as you were at that point that was um, protecting your breath? Did you have something on your face that was protecting your smoke, or at this point are you still without some
yeah. Good
apparatus?
question. That's something I kind of I kind of take that for granted. In the wildland world, so that's forest fires to most people, you don't wear anything.
Okay.
There's no respiratory protection at
Okay.
all. So
Okay.
you're just eating smoke the
Yeah.
entire time.
Hmm.
Uh, I see commercials all the time about, do you have mesothelioma, right? I probably will one day. But no, there's nothing to protect you from that. You're just out there. You
Okay.
wear some Nomex clothing. So
Okay.
Nomex is fire resistive, but it's
Okay.
not fireproof.
Okay.
That's about it. So your mind and your safety checklist and your situational awareness are what keep you safe out there.
Right. Okay. So your breath
So
is you're breathing differently in this situation because we often discuss the linkage, right, between
yeah,
breathing
I know where
and
you're going. I know
stress.
where you're
Yeah.
going with
Okay.
this.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So we get close. We can't even see the cabins. The two guys at the cabins start yelling,
Sure.
and they are trying to get a hold of us with whistles. So we know where they are. I can't see them. And the guy in the boat says, "I'm not taking you any closer." So it was like a scene out of a movie. Me and my assistant jump out of the boat into the river and just go to shore and make our way. And the guy in the boat takes off. So now we're on our own.
Oh my goodness.
So we find the cabin. It wasn't far, but we find the cabin and we
Right.
tie in with these two guys. And we kind of get a rundown from them. And they said, this fire is making a push on us. We're talking to some air resources that are above it that can see the whole thing. And they're like, we're about to get isolated here and there's nowhere to go. The guy in the boat just left. So we had to make choices under duress of time. That's how I want to kind of tie this in. You have
Yes.
a limited amount of time
Right.
to make a very important choice,
Right.
and you got to be calm doing it. So we had to decide: one, how safe are we going to be?
Hmm.
Two, can we save this cabin? And
Right.
in that span of time, we decided that we could do some work to try to save the cabin. So
Hmm.
we chainsaws, moving stuff around that doesn't burn, preparing for this fire front to get to us, knowing that the only place that was really safe was the river.
Right.
So lo and behold, fast forward, the fire gets close to us, starts picking up, and this wall of fire leans over us,
Oh
gets
my.
to the cabin,
Oh my God.
and it creates so much. Like, think of a campfire and how you see embers raise up. Now
Right.
magnify that times a million.
Right.
So the heat of the fire was so intense and the air being sucked into it that the guy had a 14-foot aluminum boat. It picked it up and
Jeez.
just sucked it away,
Oh my gosh.
stuck in our hard hats off our heads.
Whoa.
And we had to make a decision to get in the river. So
Right.
we retreat into the river. And when the fire hits where the cabin is and close to the river, it has nothing to burn. So it obviously lays down.
Mm.
We kind of wait it out with our heads just barely sticking out of the water. It calms down after a few minutes, and now we have another decision, right? We can't just sit in the freezing water the whole time. So we
Right.
get out, we go reevaluate, and we start finding little fires all around the cabins. So we start fighting fire with just hard hats full of water, digging
Wow.
with our Pulaskis, cutting things out with a chainsaw. And during this time, you can't save this shed over here that's burning to the ground.
Right.
You want to keep the cabin from burning, so we're trying to get fires out there. Radio traffic, nobody can come get us because the smoke, the fire is so intense.
Oh my
There's no
goodness.
backup. It's just the four of us.
Right.
So we just decide to go to work, rely on our situational awareness, try to stay calm, and focus on the mission.
Right.
I think that's another tie-in with jiu-jitsu here, is the
You-
focus on what's happening.
Yeah.
You don't have time for anything else. So we start this process, and then the fire turned. So it only burnt part of the forest that was right up to the cabin.
Right.
The fire turned and decided to burn the rest of it up to the other side of the cabin.
Okay.
Mm.
And it came back to hit us again. So this time we were ready because we knew what to expect. So we
Right.
jump
And
in the
all
river.
that, all that because of like winding, changing directions.
Yeah, so it's really wild, and I'm going to keep it real short because you can go down the rabbit hole. But fire, I tell people, think of fire as water running down a hill. So when you pour water at the top of the hill, it's going to follow the crevices, and it's going to go really fast in steep parts, and it's going to go really slow on mellow parts. Fire does the exact opposite uphill. So fire is driven by topography, it's driven by wind, and it's driven by fuel, what it's burning. So it can come down one part, burn one half, and then create its own wind, or get some wind from weather and get pushed another way and burn what wasn't, or follow a chute up a mountain. So it does crazy things like that. And it turned and came back at us. We had to jump in the river a second time, ride it out. Then we finally get out of the river, continue fighting fire. We save the cabin, we save the main shed, and then things clear up enough that they could bring in the reinforcement.
Wow.